The 3 skills I'm going to tell you about shortly will transform the way you lead yourself and others if you put them into practice with diligence. But here's a warning. They fly in the face of leadership theory and run counter to the received wisdom on how leaders should behave. Before we get into the substance, click on the subscribe button below to make sure you don't miss my next video. So, first off, the reason these are inside-out skills is because they require an inner focus of attention on the way you think, feel, and perceive to create real outer change in terms of how you behave, how you respond to circumstances, your decision-making, your relationships with others, and the impact you have on the world in general, which I think you'll agree is the crux of leadership. So let's get started with skill number 1, which is what I call non-judgmental curiosity. This is the ability to inquire with an open mind. Sounds easy. It's not. In leadership, we're so used to having to make judgments and take action, we've lost the art of staying open to possibilities, curiously mulling over the various scenarios. There's no better example of this than brainstorming, when we ask the team to float new ideas, and sooner or later someone will suggest something so patently absurd, unwise, or unworkable that we just can't resist shutting it down with a "that'll never work," or even just a raised eyebrow. No surprise then that you won't hear from that individual again. Judgment works by selecting one idea over and above the rest. This is why Lady Justice carries a balance and a sword. She uses the balance to select the best outcome and the sword to kill off all the others. But in brainstorming and many other business activities, terminating ideas too early can be very damaging. Firstly, it can lead to the loss of creative solutions, and secondly, it can undermine the confidence of the individual that was brave enough to speak up, ensuring they never do again. The skill of non-judgmental curiosity requires a very firm inner discipline that will transcend any criticism that arises and continue to explore the idea through genuine curiosity. Funnily enough, executive coaches and facilitators are, or at least should be, very good at doing this, since neutrality is at the core of their value to others. The less judgmental you can be, the more psychologically safe people will feel, and the more open they will make themselves to offering crazy but possibly brilliant ideas. As a non-exec director, I would deliberately ask provocative questions that would force the execs and the CEO to consider scenarios they had already prejudged and killed off as irrelevant. Non-execs can do that. Staff may not feel so safe. Non-judgmental curiosity is a powerful skill to have, but like all skills, it has a time and a place. Eventually, decisions need to be taken, and the balance and the sword used ruthlessly to decide on one course of action, one choice. There's a rather nice anecdote about 2 pottery classes, one of which is told to make as many pots as they can, the other is told to make the best pot that they can. In that second instruction, the class is being asked not only to make, but to judge. So no surprise that it was the first class that made as many pots as time permitted that also made the best pot. Making lots of pots feeds curiosity. Making the best pot feeds judgment. Skill number 2 I call find the gap. Not mind the gap, but find it. To know what the gap is, bear with me a while I describe something that should be very familiar to you. Imagine you hold the door open for someone and they breeze through without even acknowledging your courtesy. Can you remember how that feels? Or when a car jumps the queue that you're patiently sat in? Or when your teenage son rolls his eyes at you for the very first time? These are all triggers that set off an emotional reaction, which you may go on to externalise with some appropriate communication. Either way, someone else's poor behaviour creates an immediate negative emotional reaction within you. They make you feel bad. But there's a bit missing in this description of how we react to others. The missing bit is a thought. There has to be a thought to generate the emotion. They are 2 sides of the same coin. So that thought will be something like, how rude, or inconsiderate bastard, Or, my children should treat me with more respect. You know the kind of thing. If you're alert, you'll spot the thought. If you're really awake and self-aware, you'll also spot a little gap between the thought and the emotion. This gap gives you the opportunity to think, do I really want to go down this path? Do I really want to condemn the behaviour and then have to sit in the outrage, anger and frustration of it all? This gap gives you choice and provides the opportunity to respond rather than react. The difference being that responses are intelligent, considered and generally benefit all concerned. Reactions, on the other hand, are unconscious, habit-driven, and other than being unpleasant to experience, can get you into all sorts of trouble. When you find the gap, you are no longer a victim of circumstance and habit, and you get to choose the best response for the situation you're in. When you're in a leadership position, this skill becomes invaluable, not just for your own clarity of mind and emotional balance, but as an example to those you lead. Remember, as a leader, it's your responsibility to show others how to lead. When you find the gap, you are the master. When you don't even look for it, you're the slave. The third skill I call embracing ignorance. Now, the word ignorance has connotations which are generally negative, so you may prefer to call the third skill embracing unknowing. Either way, it's about feeling utterly comfortable with not knowing the answer to a question, issue, or challenge. It's also being utterly respectful of the difference between knowing and believing. Let's take the example of faith. You know, the religious or spiritual kind of faith. A lot of people out there believe in God, or at least some kind of higher power or intelligence. But a lot of other people are atheist, meaning they actively believe there is no God or consciousness operating behind the scenes, so to speak. Both believe, sometimes quite vehemently, either in the existence or the non-existence of a supreme being. But as always in a polarized situation such as this, there is a third perspective. Here it is that of the agnostic who refuses to take a position because they can't bring themselves to believe in the existence or non-existence of anything that they don't know to be true. Because agnostics have no direct experience of God or proof of no God, they sit quite happily in this state of not knowing. I suspect many believers and non-believers have no direct experience of God or evidence of no God, but they choose to believe without knowing. Now, I'm not judging the Pope and Richard Dawkins. I can't really after what I've been saying. But I am saying that in a leadership capacity, we need to be very clear on the difference between knowing and believing so that we don't fill that space of unknowing with a belief and then call it knowledge. Here's why. When you embrace that state of unknowing, you become open to knowledge. As soon as you say, I know, especially when it's just a belief, you shut down the possibility of learning, of expanding your knowledge. I know rejects knowledge. I don't know invites new knowledge. This attitude also gets around the problem of unknown unknowns. Remember Donald Rumsfeld? There's probably a whole heap of stuff that you don't know, if that makes any sense. When you're happy to sit in a state of unknowing, knowledge can flow you never knew existed. And that's exactly where a leader should be. Now, all this doesn't mean you sit around all day saying, I don't know, but from that state, you will absolutely know when you need to judge, speak, and act. So there we have 3 critical skills for great leadership: non-judgmental curiosity, find the gap, and embracing ignorance. How do you develop them? Well, there are 2 ways. One is practice, the other is meditation. Establishing a meditation practice will give you the awareness, the clarity, and stillness of mind required to strengthen these skills and many more beyond. But those are for another day. If you've enjoyed this video, click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more. See you in the next video.